Hello, my name is Persefoni Tsaliki. I teach economics in the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. And today, we'll talk about unemployment and how unemployment is treated in economic theory over the years. What we really see in the world outside is that the Western economies, that is, the most developed economies in the world, have huge problems with unemployment. And the unemployment is not only there, but continues a rising trend. Also, what we see in the news, in the classes, wherever there is a speech about the unemployment, that unemployment is treated usually within the mainstream literature, the mainstream framework, and most of the time, unemployment is attributed to labor market rigidities. That is, the labor structure, the market of the labor is blamed, that is not free, is not open. There are market rigidities which do not allow the market to clear, and therefore unemployment is present. This is usually the way that unemployment is treated in mainstream economics, the economics, in other words, that we hear and learn at least in undergraduate level. However, at the same time, we have another way of looking at unemployment, which is based on the Keynesian tradition. And there, in the Keynesian tradition, unemployment is due mainly to the lack of effective demand. That is, there is no growing economy, therefore there is no enough demand outside in the market, and therefore we have the problem of unemployment. What is certain over the last years, not only the last years, but over several decades, the theoretical and empirical studies with respect to employment have reached over the years contradictory and inconclusive results. In other words, they cannot find the source, they cannot find the cause of unemployment. In this lecture that we have today, I will present another view about what is the problem of unemployment, what is its cause and its source, and I will try to show to you that unemployment is a systemic element, is a systemic factor, is a systemic problem which is there because of the normal operation of the labor market. The presentation that will follow is summary of the following articles, which is going to be in your bibliography as well. And also, through the presentations, through the PowerPoint presentations, I have in parentheses the names and the years of different authors which present different views about unemployment, which also these consist the bibliography, the references that you have to study. Well, unemployment, if we go in a regular textbook, that is the textbooks that we have in the first year of our undergraduate course, we'll see that is categorized in the following: a seasonal, which is due to the seasonal employment, frictional, structural, and cyclical. The first three categories are considered normal to some extent and accepted, and are viewed as byproducts of the normal operation of the labor market. What I mean by that is that I have seasonal unemployment because I have seasonal employment, for instance, in tourist industry. I have frictional employment because always takes some time to go from one job to another. You're not unemployed, you're just between two jobs. We have structural unemployment because in some cases we have obsolete skills of the labor force which will be acquired by it and therefore will find employment. Cyclical unemployment, however, is viewed as the deviation from the normal, which means that cyclical unemployment is the primary concern of economics, which means that Any time that we refer to unemployment policies, to unemployment problems and so on, we mostly deal with the cyclical unemployment, which is due to the economic activity. In other words, if the economy is doing well, it's logical to assume that cyclical unemployment is zero or very, very low. If the economic activity is low, in other words, we are in a recession, cyclical unemployment increases, and therefore. In this case, for the cyclical unemployment, we have the Keynesian propositions, which say that in case that we have low economic activity for any reason, for a recession, for a crisis, and so on, what we have to do is to follow counter-cyclical economic policies to minimize, if not to eliminate, this kind of unemployment. If we go through the historical data, we'll see that in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, economies entered in a prolonged period of a recession, where for the first time in the economic history of capitalism, we have simultaneously the problem of inflation and unemployment, which is known as the problem of stagflation. And because of this coincidence of the two problems, of the two bad things, inflation and unemployment, Keynesian economics entered into a trouble because couldn't explain what was going on into real economies. And somehow that was the cause that new theories or new trials or new views were presented in order to explain from one side the unemployment, from the other side the inflation, and at the same time both of them. Therefore, although till the 60s, 70s we had the mainstream argument that leave the market alone to work itself out, and therefore you have no unemployment. And on the other hand, after the 30s especially, we had the Keynesian tradition which says that we can cure the problem of unemployment with counter-cyclical problems. In the crisis that the system faced during the 70s, new alternative approaches like monetarism, supply-side economics, new classical economics, and so on, which all of them are rooted mainly in mainstream economics, arose in an attempt to interpret stagflation, that is the problem of unemployment and inflation at the same time. What I would like to point at this point is also the following, that despite the efforts that all the economists made during this period in the 70s, 80s, 90s to talk about unemployment, what we face and what we saw in reality is that despite the recovery in the 90s and early 2000s, unemployment continued to rise. That was a fact, and nobody doubts it. So the fact is that unemployment is a big problem, and it is a real evil in economics in many, many aspects, and has many different dimensions. On the personal level, unemployment is a bad thing because demoralizes the person that is unemployed, makes him, her to feel useless, cannot support his family, goes into deep depression, and so on. So from a personal level, unemployment is an evil, someone to face it. From the social aspect of it, the rise in unemployment or the huge number of unemployed people is a big problem, because what we face, what we deal as a problem when unemployment is huge, is that we have problems with the social cohesion. This is a problem that, for instance, Greece faces right now, which the unemployment, at least the official, is 27, 28%. The unofficial is much higher. Also, from the state point of view, unemployment is somehow an evil. Why? Because if you have a welfare state, means that if you have a lot of unemployed people, somehow you have to to give them some kind of income, unemployment benefits, in order to cope with their everyday needs. That means your expenditures as government, as state increase, and if you are in a recession period or you have a debt problem like Greece and so on, that's a big problem because you don't have the money. So unemployment from any respect and from any aspect is considered as an evil in the life. Let's see now, and this is very important to understand and to make this theoretical presentation of the different approaches to unemployment, because by making these presentations, it becomes very clear how the different policies come to deal with the problem of unemployment that are suggested from the officials. Well, we start with the neoclassical view, which is what we call the mainstream view, which is the view that we have in textbook analysis of macro. In this neoclassical view, unemployment is only temporary, because if there are no obstacles in the labor market, variations in the real wage soon will restore full employment of labor. In other words, if you leave the market alone, in other words, if you take away any kind of problems and obstacles in the operation of the labor market, the variations, the fluctuations of the real wage will reach the point where we're going to have equilibrium at this market. How much this real wage has to fluctuate? As much as it needs to clear the market. In other words, if the real wage has to go 50 euros per year, that means this is the wage that the market is willing to give to the employment, to the employed. Therefore, everyone who is unemployed is willingly unemployed. That means voluntarily decides to be unemployed. It's not the problem of an economy, therefore. So, since the unemployment within this neoclassical view is a voluntary thing, it means that there is no need for government policy, for employment policy. The only thing that has to guarantee the government from its side is to make sure that the market operates freely, the labor market. In this analysis, the equilibrium in the labor market and the determination of the real wage are independent of social forces. If, however, such forces exist, disequilibrium in the market may arise. Therefore, a policy hint here is make sure that this kind of obstacles or social forces do not exist. Unemployment, if these problems, if we have unemployment and if we have this kind of obstacles, it means that unemployment is the result of the stickiness and inefficiencies in the labor market, caused by powerful labor unions, government interventions, and the like. What is the government intervention here? For instance, to set the minimum wage. That is a government intervention, because it does not allow the labor market to clear. From this perspective, persistent unemployment is attributed to labor market rigidities, that is, within the neoclassical view. Any unemployment is due to labor market rigidities, which together with poor education, lack of motivation, and insufficient information about available vacancies make unemployment to persist. In quotations, in parentheses, we have the different authors that support this argument. And this idea and this view about unemployment is the basic foundation upon which the current practices of economic policy, particularly in USA and in EU countries, is based. And this is the reason why after the 70s, if we look hard and we look where in the policy, in the employment policy of the European Union, for instance, we'll see that they have any kind of fiscal policy to cope with the problem of unemployment, but mostly rely on monetary policies. Let's move on. In the 70s, with Friedman, we have the idea of the natural rate of unemployment, which does nothing else but to supplement the analysis of the neoclassical view, for it is viewed as the minimum unemployment level consistent with market-clear conditions in the labor market. However, here it is very worthwhile to point out that it is for the first time within the mainstream economics that they recognize and accept the fact that full employment is not zero unemployment. Because it says that what is the natural rate of unemployment, which means that if I am at the natural rate of unemployment, I'm in a full employment status. What is this? It's the minimum unemployment level. For the first time, therefore, we realize, or it is recognized in the economic literature, that we have unemployment, in any case. As a result of this natural rate of unemployment and so on, the economic policies has been heavily influenced by the perception that low levels of unemployment will cause inflation to accelerate. Has no room for an active employment policy exists, since it will interfere with market functioning. And what is the natural rate of unemployment for an economy? There is no any theoretical argument that will tell you what exactly this point will be. It is 5%, it is 7%, it is 10%. There is no any theoretical model that will tell you that in this particular case, in this economy, under these conditions, the natural rate of unemployment is 10%. There is no way of saying it. Therefore, any effort to lower, according to these people that support natural rate of unemployment, and the NAIRU we'll see later on, any effort to lower the existing natural rate of joblessness will trigger inflationary wage and price pressures, which is the foundation of the well-known non-accelerated inflation rate of unemployment, the NAIRU argument. The NAIRU argument, which is, as I told you, the non-accelerated inflation rate of unemployment, is the one that goes through the whole policies that are pursued, are implemented by the European Union and the USA. In other words, we don't care what is going to be the level of unemployment. What we do care is inflation to be constant. Now, if the situation in any economy goes with constant inflation together with huge unemployment, that's not a problem, because our concern of our policy is to keep inflation low, inflation constant. According to NAIRU, that's the idea of the NAIRU approach, the NAIRU argument. According to NAIRU approach, wage push variables are crucial in explaining the rise in unemployment, and within this context, most of the policies designed to combat this problem focuses on the necessary labor market reforms. I would like to, and that's why I have them in the presentation, some very, tricky or curious quotations. One is from the Siebert and the other is from the well-known Krugman. According to Siebert, the specter of unemployment that is haunting Europe will not be exorcised unless governments are prepared to undertake major reforms of the institution set up of the labor market. In other words, to liberate the labor market. Krugman says that the generosity of Europe's welfare state is in some sense responsible for the rise in their unemployment rates. Therefore, the pertinent economic empirical literature is not supportive at all to the view that labor market rigidities are the primary cause of unemployment and to the idea that the deregulation of national labor markets will increase the level of employment. What I point here is that despite the belief that unemployment is due to labor market rigidities, during the same period, we have other kind of literature which shows that the cause of unemployment is not due to labor market rigidities. However, the concept of natural rate of unemployment and the Nairo argument remains popular among economists and policymakers despite of criticism even from mainstream economists. That is, even in mainstream economics, we find people that question their theoretical and empirical findings. There is another, let's say, group of economists who share the Keynesian view. The Keynesian approach to unemployment at first sight appears to be different from the neoclassical. A closer inspection, however, reveals that both approaches share the view that unemployment is the result of the malfunction of the labor market. The only difference between the two is that for neoclassical and, let's say, mainstream economics, unemployment is the result of the malfunctioning labor market, whereas for the Keynesian economics, unemployment is the result of inefficient effective demand. Therefore, by correcting either the labor market rigidities, either the lack of effective demand, no problem of unemployment arises. The Nairo argument falls within the idea that a proper policy mix can achieve the desired result of full employment. The goal to full employment has been just redefined, not necessarily according to the number of unemployed, but rather according to whether or not the existing level of unemployment accelerates or decelerates the inflation rate. Nairo, in fact, is a Keynesian device, and full employment is viewed as an attainable and at the same time desired objective. Therefore, mainstream and Keynesian approaches share that social forces play no role in determining the level of employment in the system, but just the optimization and the free operation of the market system will solve the problem, not social forces, therefore. Here it is where I'm going to present to you another view of unemployment, and I will try to show how unemployment arises, why arises, and if it is a problem that can be solved according to the policies that economists can follow. This view that I'm going to present here to you is based on the writings of classical economists like Smith, Ricardo, Mill, and Marx. These economists start from the heart of the system. And the heart of the system means that if you start from the heart of the system, what you have to realize is what are the laws of motions? What are the mechanisms that operate within the capitalist system, and what are the results that these mechanisms create? According to classical and Marxian approach, the mechanism that regulates the dynamics of capitalism is competition, which is envisioned as a turbulent and a warlike process. In this warlike process, what is the task of any capitalist, what is the task of any enterprise is to maximize its profits. And in its struggle to maximize that profit, or the profit rate, capitalists fight mainly two fronts. One is in the labor market against the workers in order to reduce wages, the unit cost, and so on. And in the other is in the product market in order to gain the market share. And this second front is against the other capitalists. The most effective way for capital to keep wages low and increase productivity is through the mechanization of the labor process, which is achieved with the introduction of fixed capital. This way to keep wages low and increase productivity is because, as I said to you, capitalists have to fight for their profits, for the rise in their profits. And as I said to you, the way of doing that is to keep wages low and increase productivity. And because of their competition in the two fronts, are imposed on them the introduction of mechanization. Therefore, the survival of individual capital in this turbulent and inherently violent process requires not only a rise in mechanization of the production process, but also the full utilization of capital, because idle machines signify lost opportunities for producing more profits, whereas unemployed people do not affect their profits. The displacement of labor by machines increases productivity, lowers unit cost, and enhances profits. Therefore, what we have in the history of capitalist system is the continuous displacement of labor by machines. That's a fact. That's a historical trend that we can see it. And this is imposed on the way that the system operates because of the competition. Hence, the replacement of labor by capital is not only a stylized fact of the process of economic development, but it is also, to a certain extent, a desired outcome of this process. That is, in other words, the desired outcome to create a stream of unemployed, which is called the reserve army of unemployed people. The dynamics of capital accumulation and economic development regulate, in fact, the supply and demand for labor in such a way as to ensure that an excess supply of labor or reserve army is constantly reproduced. The labor market is ruled by laws other than those of supply and demand that regulate the product markets. In other words, the proper function of the capitalist system is to create a stream of unemployed people. Why? Because the way that the capital is forced for higher and more profits, to maximize its profits, is forced to introduce mechanization and therefore to replace it. The continual generation of the reserve army of labor relies on the dynamic interaction of the following three factors, which characterize the developmental futures of advanced economies. The first is changes in the rate of accumulation. Capital, by its nature, is a self-expanding concept. That is, it is inherent in the capitalist system to expand. Since it needs its expansion, it means that through this mechanization, we have the increase in the demand of labor. However, this expansion of the capital system, in other words, the increase in the accumulation of the capital, at the same time, we have the occurrence of changes in the capital labor market. This capital labor market comes of the incessant need for mechanization of the production process, which reduces the demand of labor. What I'm saying here is that the first, changes in the rate of accumulation, increases the demand for labor. The second, which is the mechanization process and the rise in the capital labor ratio, decreases the demand of labor. At the same time, another law takes place, which is the law of changes in the potential working population. Through the de-skilling process that occurs, through the commodification of life that increases through the years, the supply of labor, and especially of unskilled labor, increases. Therefore, we have here one factor that, in a way, increases demand for labor, the other factor reduces the demand for labor, and the third factor increases the supply of labor. This operation of the three factors give as a result the reserve army of labor, the unemployment, which is not, from the analysis that we had up to this point, a product of disequilibrium. Also, it is not a dysfunctional outcome of the system that can be eliminated by an appropriate economic policy. But the presence of the unemployment, the presence of the reserve army of labor is a stylized factor, element of the capitalist mode of production. It is an essential component. In other words, unemployment, it is an essential component of accumulation because it supplies capital with a necessary degree of flexibility and a critical mechanism to regulate the wage rate. According to Marx, relative surplus population is therefore the pivot upon which the law of demand and supply of labor works, and is not the wage, it's not the clear of the labor market. It is interesting to note at this point that some neoclassical economists somehow accept the argument of the reserve army and argue that to a certain extent, unemployment may work as a necessary worker discipline device, and therefore accept it. A systemic element prevailing economic growth and development is the massive introduction of machinery in the production process, which simultaneously creates and destroys employment, advances and deteriorates labor skills. From the empirical point of view, the economic analysis on machinery and its impact on economic progress focused mainly on the compensation argument, that is, on the various market mechanisms that are triggered by the introduction of machinery and technological change itself, and counterbalance the initial labor-saving impact of innovation. Here you have the different mechanisms that have been proposed in the literature. Nevertheless, these studies have shown that technological change may induce market forces which can potentially counterbalance the initial labor-saving effect, but all these compensation mechanisms can be also hindered by the existence of drawbacks which are often neglected by the literature. And I have some results and some studies that show that these compensation arguments that mainly we find in the main literature as the result of the mechanization, show that these studies show that the compensation mechanisms do not work, and therefore the mechanization of the production process, in fact, increases the unemployment. Now, why we have mechanization of the production process? Why entrepreneurs introduce machinery? Because they need higher labor productivity. Higher labor productivity becomes the basic condition for its survival. Basic trend of capital accumulation is the introduction of progressively sophisticated machinery, which reduces unit cost, expands production of higher scale, and eventually transforms previously luxury goods into goods of mass production and subsequently into goods of mass consumption. This incessant introduction of machinery transforms the nature of the labor process, intensifies work, introduces methods that further promote the division and specialization of labor, promotes work rationalization, which serves to simplify the standardized work so that it can be done in the least amount of time at the lowest possible cost of business, etc. Since the function of machinery is responsible for all essential decisions in the production process, many skills are removed from workers who are bound to perform more repetitive tasks at a more productive rate. Labor is in this way further subdivided, and therefore it is de-skilled even more. The subsumption of labor to capital takes place since workers become subsumed to the operation of machines rather than the other way around. A new technology which is finally rationalized and prepared for mass production takes away the skills of a great deal of workers, and mechanization and de-skilling are the logical consequences of capital's need to increase labor productivity. And more importantly, the new skills that the machines can introduce for a while, sooner rather than later, are simplified and acquired by the majority of laborers. Therefore, even from the skill argument, we see the following: that reserve army unemployment is present there. What is the source of unemployment is nothing else but the introduction, the massive introduction of machines in the production process, and it is something that the capitalist mode of production cannot escape because it is guided, it is forced to accumulate, it is imposed on it the quest for higher profitability, and we show that this can be done only through the introduction of machinery. And why is that? Because of competition. Because, as we said, capitalists fight workers for increased productivity, fight the other capitals to increase the market share, and because of this competition is forced, in order to maximize his profits, has to introduce machines which finally lead to de-skilling, to unemployment, and to reserve army. In the following two, in a very short period, I will present to you some empirical results which try to verify which are the sources of unemployment. In the first model, which is called neoclassical Nairo model, we have the regular neoclassical variables that are in this kind of analysis, where the most important variable in this neoclassical Nairo model is a variable that captures the market rigidities. In the Keynesian model, we have a variable that captures the demand dimension of the economy, and the classical Marxian model, we have the capital accumulation, in other words, the increase in capital stock, we have the capital-labor ratio, we have the labor participation, and the Z variables that is common to all of them are some key variables, control variables, let's say. We test these three models and in a way, the strength of explaining unemployment of these three conceptualizations of unemployment in three different economies, in Germany, USA, and Sweden. And we included these three economies because each of them represents a different market structure, with USA the most liberal one, Sweden the most restricted one, and Germany something in between. And the results, as you can see, is that the basic variable that captures the neoclassical Nairo argument, which deals with the market rigidity, is statistically not significant in any economy. The Keynesian variable, which is the growth of effective mandate and the degree of capacity utilization, are statistically significant in all economies. Whereas in classical Marxian core models, capital stock, capital-labor ratio are statistically significant in all three countries. In other words, The empirical analysis is in sharp contrast to the view that the presence of labor market rigidities bears responsibility for the high unemployment rate, and to the policy conclusions according to which countries with considerable unemployment figures should undertake structural reforms in order to free labor markets from alleged rigidities. Therefore, we have to be quite skeptical about the policy proposals that its economy in Europe faces right now, and these policy proposals suggest the dramatic liberalization of the labor market in order to cope with the increase in unemployment in the European countries. As the analysis shows, and also the other people argued, all the variables or market rigidities probably play no role in explaining unemployment, and we have to look to something else. Growth dynamics of an economy may constitute the main cause of unemployment and not necessarily the structure of labor market. Hence, these findings may give rise to an altogether different perspective to the problem of unemployment and may therefore suggest different policy proposals whose emphasis will be on the dynamics of capital accumulation in combination with demand forces, and it will not focus solely on establishing an unrestricted labor market. Thank you for your time and your attention.